Happy Friday. John Lorden here with your weekly episode of BrainScratch. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Just a quick note, I've been working in a new camera and I've been having a heck of a time about it. I'm on my third camera at this point, so I just want to say if anything weird happens with the video, if it starts stuttering or if there's artifacts on it or something, I'm working through it. Please bear with me. This is going to be a bit of a combo episode of BrainScratch. We've got a couple of updates I want to give you, and then what I consider the main story. I'm sure you can see from the thumbnail and the title, the first crime in space. It's kind of interesting because I started looking into that topic a few months ago when there hadn't been a crime that actually occurred in space, and now we get to this week. But is it really a crime? Is there something else going on with all this? We're going to dig in there. But before all that, I want to make a very quick announcement. It is the first anniversary of Crime After Crime, and we have a first anniversary special that we're releasing on September 1st, 2019. We're doing Florida Man stories, which of course is already going to be entertaining. But on top of that, we've got some special guest appearances from people you might know, other people in the true crime space, YouTubers, podcasters, maybe even a television host, maybe even an additional one. We've got a lot of special guest appearances in this episode. I'm really proud of it. I worked really hard on it. We both did, obviously. So I want to invite you to it. September 1st, 2019, Crime After Crime. You can check it out on the YouTube channel or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts and find out who we crown as the winner of Season 1. All right, two updates. I've been in contact with two very distraught mothers over the past week, and interestingly, the story we're covering today kind of has to do with distraught mothers as well. The first one I've been talking to has been the mother of Brittany Phillips, and that's a case that we covered just a few weeks ago. Maggie is known to drive across the country. She has graphics all over her vehicle trying to raise exposure to her daughter's unsolved murder case. We know that some of those graphics include a Parabon snapshot picture of the DNA that was found at the scene. Now we're hearing that DNA might not actually be connected to the case. Here at KFOR.com, investigators say a promising lead in the search for a killer has resulted in another dead end. In 2018, police used DNA evidence recorded at the scene or recovered at the scene to generate a composite sketch. And here's the sketch. We even showed it in the episode. And now officials are saying that further investigation determined the man was not involved in her death. So her mother is extremely upset. This was really probably our strongest hope for being valuable information that could lead investigators toward the person that did this horrible act. I have a little more detail I think I can share with you. Essentially, I made the assumption that the DNA came from Britney's body, which is bad to make assumptions like that, particularly when you're working on stuff like this. It didn't. It came from some other area of the house, and I don't want to go into specifics too much, but essentially this DNA turned out to be someone that was known to come over and visit the house. I believe there is an alibi that is part of this as well. So essentially, he has been ruled out. So where does this leave the investigation? I don't know. I'm hoping that they might try some other technology to find other DNA samples. I don't know if there might have been fingernail scrapings that were taken at the time. I think that's pretty common for investigations being processed in this way. So I'd be really curious if there wasn't some DNA available there. I'm just hoping that another sample comes out of this, or that we have someone step up, someone that has the information and calls in that tip. So right now, I think those are our two best bets for seeing progress on this case. And just my heart is really broken for Brittany's mother. She's really having a tough time with this. That last trip seemed like it didn't go as she expected. She was hoping to raise more exposure. We were kind of a little bit of a beacon of light in that, in terms of helping her out. But now she hits this roadblock, and after this many years of searching for justice, it's just, I can't imagine what she's going through on a personal level. So that is One update, we have another update. This is actually from a Searchlight case that we covered, and that's the case of Johnathan Hamilton. I've been in contact with his mother. I know her as Angie or Angela for a long time, and we've been talking about all kinds of different things. I've been trying to figure out any which way to help her figure out where her son is. We now have part of that answered. Jawbone belongs to Houston man missing since 2015. The Bastrop County Sheriff's Office and Bastrop Police announced Friday that Jawbone, found on July 28th, belonged to 26-year-old Johnathan Lee Hamilton. Other human remains were not found. This is obviously terrible. I can tell you guys that the jawbone was found in a water source. I don't know if there is more investigation going on with this. I'm also trying to find out what is listed as the cause of death on the death certificate. I don't even know if there's a death certificate in play yet. I don't know if a coroner has reviewed any of this. So I've basically just been, it's tough because I know Angie's in a really tough spot right now. She's trying to figure out what she's supposed to do. I'm just trying to kind of nudge her in the right direction in terms of, finding the death certificate, seeing what's listed on there. Is there a coroner that she could talk to that has reviewed this? Is there further investigation that's going on with this? Now that they've found a part of him in one location, could they at least kind of focus the search on that location and see if they could recover more? A lot of questions, not a whole lot of answers except for one, and that is certainly that Johnathan won't be coming home. And my heart is really broken for Angie. She has been really through the ringer on this whole case. So that's it for the updates. A couple of tough ones today. Let's get into the topic. First crime in space. Has it actually happened? What's going on? You might have seen some news stories kicking around about this. We're going to start at Wikipedia with the profile of an astronaut, Anne Charlotte McClain. Anne McClain is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, engineer, and NASA astronaut. Her call sign, Animal, dates back to her bruising rugby days. She was the flight engineer for Expedition 58/59 to the International Space Station. She was up in the space station for 6 months. Born and raised in Spokane, Washington, she graduated from the United States Military Academy, West Point, and was commissioned an Army officer in 2002. She then attended the University of Bath, where she earned a master's degree in aerospace engineering in 2004, and the University of Bristol, where she earned a master's degree in international relations in 2005. If this woman wasn't amazing enough, we're talking military service, but the education, it's just, this is reading to me like American hero type stuff. Here is a picture of her in her Army service uniform as well. Here's a picture of her in space. McClain is a recipient of the Bronze Star Medal, the Air Medal with Valor device, 2 additional Air Medals, 2 Army Commendation Medals, 2 Army Achievement Medals, the Iraq Campaign Medal with 2 service stars, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, and 3 Overseas Service Ribbons. Have they made a G.I. Joe of this woman yet? I am just completely blown away by her story. When you hear about astronauts and you look into their past and what it takes for them to get to that level, she is really firing on all cylinders. You can really see it here. But then we've got these 2 words right at the bottom of the article, personal life. And that is going to lead us a little bit into what's going on. But before that, one more thing that's amazing about her. First woman on the moon could be a soldier. She's one of 12 women that's being considered to be the first woman on the moon, and NASA has a mandate to get that done within the next 5 years, I believe, or something along those lines. Lieutenant Colonel Anne McClain is one of 12 female astronauts who could become the first woman on the moon by 2024. A list compiled by NASA shows she's also the only one of the 12 who's in the Army, and this is from Stripes.com. So what's going on with this case? The New York Times is one of the sources that broke this case earlier, so we're going to get some detail from them. Obviously, we have another picture of Anne suited up in her space gear. Summer Warden a former Air Force intelligence officer living in Kansas, has been in the midst of a bitter separation and parenting dispute for much of the past year. So she was surprised when she noticed that her estranged spouse still seemed to know things about her spending. Ms. Warden put her intelligence background to work, asking her bank about the locations of computers that had recently accessed her bank account using her login credentials. The bank got back to her with an answer. One was a computer network registered to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. Ms. McLean acknowledged that she had accessed the bank account from space, so her soon-to-be ex-wife acknowledged that she did actually log in from space, insisting through a lawyer that she was merely shepherding the couple's still intertwined finances. Ms. Warden felt differently. She filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, and her family lodged one with NASA's Office of Inspector General, accusing Ms. McLean of identity theft and improper access to Ms. Warden's private financial records. So, I know many of you out there are in long-term relationships, and there's a few different ways that people do finances. Some people are very isolated. I keep my account, you keep your account. We're going to keep it separate. When we have to pay a bill, I'll give you half of that bill and it goes in. Other people really kind of commingle their finances. We'll have one joint account. But here, this is a little interesting because it's fairly clear that this isn't Anne's account. She's really using her wife's login credentials to look into her wife's account. But does that mean that their finances aren't still intertwined in some way? Not necessarily. What if her wife is making the mortgage payment or making a car payment or something along those lines on Anne's behalf? I mean, there still could be aspects where their finances are intertwined and where that information could be important to Anne. For example, if it was, let's say it was a car payment or something like that, it could be that the credit that was used for that purchase is also in Anne's name. And if she's worried that her soon-to-be ex-wife is bitter and maybe not making that payment, it could impact her credit as well. So I'm already kind of interested in what's going on with this story, just in terms of the mechanics of, is there really a crime that's going on here? Identity theft, I've looked into it a bit. There's a lot of different explanations about what identity theft is. A lot of them point towards there having to be some method of actually stealing from the person. It's not just a matter of running around with someone's driver's license saying, hey, my name is Joe Smith. In most definitions, it's more than that. It's using that driver's license when you've been pulled over by a cop and you're like, oh yeah, I'm Joe Smith, write up the ticket to this guy. Or if you're busted for a more serious crime and you're like, yep, Joe Smith right here. Or you're using that ID to take out a loan, get a credit card, things of that nature. That's really where most of the definition of identity theft points. There is, in a few instances, I'm seeing some small pieces of using someone else's credentials, but it's usually leading to in an effort to take money or, really rob them of something at some point. This story doesn't seem to have that going on, but let's continue here. Mark Sundall, director of the Global Space Law Center at Cleveland State University, said he was not aware of any previous allegation of a crime committed in space. NASA officials said they were also unaware of any crimes committed on the space station. I can tell you guys, because I did look this up as a potential topic. I was really proud when I came up with the thought too. I was like, oh wow, crime in space. I don't think anyone's done that. Has it happened? I went looking. I could find nothing even close to a crime in space. I found a missing person that used to be an astronaut, but in terms of an actual crime happening out there, nothing. But there is a framework for if crimes do occur in space, and we'll definitely get to that here. On top of just the amazing background that Anne has, there was another interesting little side story that happened even before this one broke, where she was supposed to do a spacewalk with another woman. It was going to be the first all-female spacewalk, and they couldn't because apparently they didn't have enough female-specific space gear. They can only send one of them out at a time, so it wound up that her planned spacewalk got canceled. She has done other spacewalks, but because of that, she actually wound up on SNL. Well, not her, but someone pretending to be her. Just wanted to show you guys a little clip of this real quick.
And the cool thing about crying in space, Michael, is that your tears keep floating around hours after you cried them.
So they actually watched that on the space station. There's also footage of her talking about it, saying that they really needed the laugh and they appreciated, that SNL was kind of having fun with the story in that way. But then we get to this story. Over at NBC News, the two women are in the process of a divorce and battling over custody of a 6-year-old son, Warden told KPRC. She said she conceived the boy through in vitro fertilization and he was carried by a surrogate. Her son was a year old when she met McClain. The women got married in 2014. After about 3 years, they began having difficulties, Warden told KPRC. And in researching this story, I'm kind of surprised that I'm seeing some news agencies that are actually naming the son. I'm seeing other news agencies that are showing pictures of him. He's now only 6 years old, and I don't think it's great to be throwing his image out around like that. So I'm actually not going to do any of that in the coverage here. Admittedly, some of the pictures were broadcast on social media. So, I do know it's public information and all that kind of stuff, but there's something in me that feels a little weird about, we're going to kick this kid's name all around in these stories about his mother's going through this terrible divorce. Just doesn't feel right for me personally. But in 2018, McClain asked a judge to grant her shared parenting rights of the child, saying in court documents that she had been there for his first steps and first words, and that they had a very healthy and deep parental relationship. The court battle between the women has included an allegation that Warden assaulted McClain, an accusation that was eventually dropped. Warden says the two have never had a physical altercation, KPRC reported. This part of this story just breaks my heart. I am also, the product of a divorced marriage. My parents got divorced when I was about 14, I think, somewhere around there. It's a really tough thing for kids to go through, but a 6-year-old having to go through this, really, really tough. And there's nothing easy about these types of separations. I get that. People turn into seemingly other people when you go through separations like this. I totally understand that as well. But is this whole thing about a crime being committed in space, is this really about someone using someone's login, or is this just another aspect of this fight for custody that's going on for their son? That's something I'm really grappling with as we look through this story. NASA praised McClain, but said it cannot comment on personal matters. Lieutenant Colonel Ann McClain has an accomplished military career, flew combat missions in Iraq, and is one of NASA's top astronauts. She did a great job on her most recent NASA mission aboard the International Space Station. Like with all NASA employees, NASA does not comment on personal or personnel matters. The space agency added that McClain launched to space in December 3rd, 2018, and returned to Earth June 24th, 2019. Warden said the divorce between her and McClain is to be finalized in October and that no court date has been set in the custody case. Now, interestingly, I find this article at Elle, which doesn't come up as a source here on the channel too much. Real interesting title, really grabbed me. The first alleged space crime is petty as hell. And I went looking for more information to support that amazing title, and quite honestly, it's just not in here. I thought it was going to be an opinion piece the way that was titled, and just none of it actually panned out, unfortunately. I did find one thing I wanted to share with you, and that is Ann McClain kind of responding to what happened here. There's unequivocally no truth to these claims. We've been going through a painful personal separation that's now unfortunately in the media. I appreciate the outpouring of support and will reserve comment until after the investigation. I have total confidence in the IG process. So I think certainly an interesting aspect to this is First of all, was it normal for Anne to use Summer's login information? And then, even if it was normal at the time, is it still normal to expect that that would be happening when they're going through a separation? PC Mag actually raises a very interesting point in their article. First alleged space crime is less dramatic than you'd expect. Warden reportedly did not change the password to her bank account when the two separated. A common mistake, and that's how McLean accessed the account. McLean says she did so to check up on family finances and did not believe she was banned from the account. There's no indication McLean moved or used Warden's money, the Times says. I think that's a really interesting consideration here, and just a good reminder for anyone that's going through a separation like this. Even if there isn't a chance, even if it wasn't a normal practice for your spouse to be using your passwords, if you've been living with that person for that long, it's probably just a good practice to go ahead and change those passwords anyway. You'd never know what they might have seen over the shoulder or something along those lines. It's just a good safety practice, and I think this story is really pointing to that as well. If that password had been changed, this whole crime in space thing, none of it would have ever happened. Now, is that really what Summer wants out of this? What is her motivation with all this exactly? We know no money was taken. Yes, seems like her partner could have been snooping into her affairs. Maybe McLean was looking for some type of roster of what Summer was doing. You know, is she going out to a restaurant? Is she buying money for more than one person? Is she going on dates? Something of that nature. And that's an invasion of privacy, no doubt about that. But I'm just caught on this aspect that it used to be a normal mechanism for them to share this password. Now they're going through a separation. Summer does not change the password, but now all of a sudden we have a national news story. So the New York Post has done some more digging here, and I think they were trying to answer a pretty important question. So I want to share this info with you. Unfortunately, they've got their son's name written all over this article, so I don't even want to bring it up on screen. But Summer Warden said she had initially wanted to keep the dispute out of the public eye, but was prompted to speak out when McLean was awarded rights to visit her 6-year-old son 2 weeks ago. This is a direct quote from Summer. I knew I had to come forward and tell my story because the momentum of the case was not going in the direction we were hoping it would go, in accordance with the law and preserving my rights as a parent. That's a pretty telling statement. That makes me wonder if this is being blown up to a much larger issue than it actually is. It makes me wonder if Anne's perspective of, hey, this was just normal. This is something that I had been doing. You know, I watched the finances in this way previously. I was just doing the same thing I always had been. Makes me wonder about the validity of that as well. It also makes me wonder what a judge is going to think about this if it does come up in either the divorce proceedings or the rights proceedings that are going on around the 6-year-old. Warden said she didn't want it to seem like she was trying to retaliate against McLean or ruin her career by going public. Interestingly, that one statement kind of says it seems to me like that's exactly what she was trying to do. Maybe not ruin her career necessarily, but her own quote is saying that she was using this as a mechanism in this trial having to do with the custody arrangement. And from what I understand, she's upset because now her and her son have to be home at 7 p.m. twice a week because Anne has the right to have a video chat with him. And every other Saturday, I think Anne is allowed visitation of him as well. And Summer just is not happy with any of that. She doesn't want any of that stuff going on. And, you know, I think many of us have been through situations like this. This isn't completely out of the realm of understanding. Feelings are very tough in separations like this, especially when children are involved in this way. And, you know, we have a same-sex marriage here. There's a lot of pressure and things that we have to figure out to really make a fair arrangement for what's going on here. And I don't know that this whole aspect of bringing this to the public's attention, of firing off these complaints, there's something about me that struggles to even really call this identity theft. Like that whole angle, you know, trying to say the building's burning, when you've got a match that's, smoking in the middle of the street or something. I don't know. I'm really struggling with it. I'm not here to pick sides on it. It's just showing what happens, what happened, the nature of these very sensitive disagreements that we sometimes go through in separations like this. And it's tough. It's a tough one. I don't know. Anne could have been absolutely snooping. It could have been not malicious, but not with the best intent. But even if it wasn't with necessarily the best intent, is this outcome, this now national news story, is this really the fair way of dealing with all this? I'm sharing this with you guys because I'm trying to learn from this situation. I've been through a separation before. I know things get really bizarre, really weird. You've got all the money considerations. Thankfully, I didn't have any child considerations in my separation. But of course, that just tangles up everything here a whole lot more. Over at TheVerge.com, the first alleged crime committed in space raises questions about jurisdiction in orbit. All right, so what goes on here? If there is truly a crime, let's say that this absolutely is identity theft or some form of it, and this is a crime in space. What is the jurisdiction? It's an international space station. So does it depend on where the piece that you're standing on was manufactured? Does it depend on where you happen to be floating over the airspace of in terms of when the crime occurs? Like, how nutty could this be when you have all these different laws all around the world, but you're now talking about something that is off the planet? How do you figure this out? The Verge is going to help us try to do that. For the last 50 years, the majority of people who have flown to space have been representatives of their nation's governments, such as NASA astronauts or Russian cosmonauts. Their destinations have also been government-controlled facilities, some of which have fairly clear rules about how we handle any type of criminal behavior if it should arise. But nation-states no longer have sole sovereignty over space. The things humans do don't stop when we go into orbit. Michelle Hanlon, the Associate Director for the Air and Space Law Program at the University of Mississippi, tells The Verge. And doesn't this story absolutely point to what she's talking about? Yeah. Essentially, Anne is off at work. Sure, she's at work in the International Space Station, but she's just at work. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to check on the finances of, my soon-to-be separated wife. We're humans. We're humans if we're in space. We're humans if we're down here. Right now, there isn't a detailed framework for how to handle criminal disputes that occur in space on commercial vehicles, especially if issues arise between individuals from separate nations. The current case that NASA is investigating should not create any legal headaches. Quote, besides the fact that this happened to happen while she was in space, this is entirely a U.S. issue covered entirely by U.S. law, says Hanlon, which makes sense. So an American committing a crime against another American, specifically on a government or multi-government international space station like this, I don't think there's, obviously, even the lawyer's saying there's no question, but there's another consideration, like commercial space travel, which we know there are companies that are specializing in that right now or aiming for that. What if something happens from one of those companies and it's an international traveler? Here's a decent example they bring up on The Verge. If someone from the U.S. gets hurt on a private Japanese space hotel along with other passengers from Spain and Singapore, it's unclear exactly how to proceed. But because of the Outer Space Treaty, a lot of governments might need to get involved. All of a sudden, you have all these nations involved because it all rises immediately to the national level under our current outer space law, says Hanlon. People sort of think the concept of a human community off this earth is hundreds and hundreds of years away, and it's really not, says Hanlon. We really have the opportunity to do this right and to promote peace through individual behavior. And maybe something like what we're talking about now that isn't the most serious crime in the world might be a good way to start looking at some of these laws, some of these interactions, and figuring some of this framework out. And to her point, yeah, human communities living off the planet. You've got Anne that was up there for 6 months. I would pretty much consider that living off the planet. It's already happening. So the commercial concept we were talking about, a Japanese space hotel or something like that, that might be just a little bit further out, but I don't think it's much. I think she raises a really good point here, and this stuff needs to get ironed out, and maybe this case is going to help that happen. Over at Newsweek, Ann's attorney, Rusty Hardin, told the Times that McLean had accessed the account to make sure that there were sufficient funds in Worden's account to pay bills and care for the child. Worden had not let McLean know she should stop using the account. A few important considerations, and if she did think to have that conversation with Ann, I think at that point, that might have been a good trigger for her mentally to say, oh, by the way, I should probably go change that password because I know Ann had been using it previously. So I did just kind of want to round this out with the conversation of, can I access my wife's bank account? I mean, even me, if I've got the login information, is it okay for me to just go and access the account just to check on it, make sure it's okay, make sure I don't need to put money into it or that the bills are getting paid? Over at sapling.com, banking security laws are very stringent in the United States. Federal banking regulations provide broad protections to consumers to prevent unauthorized access to accounts. If you want access to your spouse's account, you should keep in mind that an account is a fund entrusted to a financial institution, and it's a matter between only the bank and the person who opened the account. Even as a spouse, your options are limited. However, under certain extenuating circumstances, you may be granted access to your wife's account. But these are pretty far-reaching circumstances. The first thing it suggests is make it a joint account. Then none of this would be an issue. And if we had that happen in this case, yeah, we wouldn't be talking about this at all. If your spouse dies, you're going to have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. You're going to have to provide them with a death certificate. And then at some point, you will be given access to the account. Of course, other legal methods. If your spouse has a severe physical or mental health challenge, you might set up a power of attorney. There might be other ways where you might have to petition a court. That's really it. And even this article, once again, ends with, the best way to access is your spouse's account. Just ask for it. And maybe that was, Ann obviously has internet access. Maybe she should have just fired off an email to Summer and said, hey, just wanted to make sure that you made this payment or that you had enough for our 6-year-old to do this school thing or whatever it is. Maybe that type of communication, even though it's really, really tough when you're going through separations like that, that type of communication might have been more appropriate than just logging into the account yourself. What about going through a divorce? We're certainly getting the sense that they have some commingled finances or some type of business that's commingled in that account. Over at gobankingrates.com, when you divorce, you might have to divide your assets, including all individual and joint banking accounts. You might have to surrender some or all of the funds in your individual bank account, even though your spouse previously had no ability to access that account. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it yourself. This is, talking about going through a divorce and actually having this agreement worked out and then getting to the end of that process. Yeah, you might have to dissolve your individual account and give them some portion of it or something along those lines. The state you are in will ultimately determine what kind of laws apply to the handling of money that is acquired during the marriage. Now, what about if you're in space? I still think it's going to boil back to, because that's seen as Ann's job, and it's not like that was, even though I consider it her living out there, being out there for 6 months, it's not like that was legally her residence. I believe that it's going to fall back to the state that they live in terms of that law. But just because your name is not on your spouse's account doesn't mean it's not community property or funds that will not be divided at the end of a divorce case, said Abby Gregory, divorce attorney. It just means the bank will not let you access the account. And even in these articles, when I'm seeing them talk about accessing the account, it seems like most of the time they're talking about actually accessing the funds. I really found very little in terms of the personal information being looked at as being a criminal act. I couldn't find anything that strong on it at all. So if this is really a case where nothing was moved, none of the funds were touched, this is just a breach of personal information at that level, I don't know how serious the court's going to take that. And obviously it might vary from state to state. But ultimately, this is about snooping on your spouse. This is from Bellevue Law Group. Threw a little extra flair on that pronunciation, apparently. More and more spouses who are thinking about divorce or are going through the divorce process are snooping on their spouse. They're looking for evidence of adultery, hidden assets, bad parenting, or other information that might give them a leg up in a divorce or custody proceeding. Some spouses have been known to use methods that are more technologically sophisticated. You might be tempted to snoop on a spouse or an ex-spouse, but if you are, it's absolutely critical to talk to a lawyer beforehand. The fact that you uncovered information illegally could cost you credibility in divorce court. And I'm wondering if that's actually going to come into play with this case as well. I'm wondering if this could be brought up by Anne's side as, hey, look, she's trying to ruin my career because I'm simply trying to get visitation with our child. I could see it being brought up by Summer's side. Hey, look, she's invading our privacy, and then she's arguing with me about things that I'm buying or things that I'm doing. This is just showing a pattern of behavior of control on her part, and I don't want my son to be a part of that. I'll be very curious to see if it does affect either the divorce or the custody proceedings going forward. Computer snooping can also get people into serious hot water. For example, a Michigan man accessed his estranged wife's email on a shared computer and discovered that his wife, who'd been married twice before, was cheating on him. The man, who claims he guessed her password to her Gmail account, was criminally charged and faces up to 5 years in prison. And that one's interesting to me because it's on a shared computer. I know sometimes you might set a little hit the tick box so that the computer remembers your login. If he uses the shared computer, his wife's login is still there, and he goes in and looks at her account, is he still committing a criminal act at that point? I don't know. One of those things where I'm coming out with a lot more questions and just wondering, has the first true crime in space actually happened? I don't know. This is certainly not the usual type of crime that we would cover on this channel. The first time we have some type of international attack, some type of interaction between people on a space station where someone's pressing charges for being harmed in some way, something along those lines. I think it's going to get a lot more interesting, particularly with a lot of the considerations we talked about today. But there's a lot of lessons we could take from today's video. Of course, on the interpersonal front, a little bit on the space front as well. And I hope that you guys are thinking about these questions and considering all this stuff just like I am. Before I end today's video, I have several people I need to thank on the Patreon side of things, starting with new patrons, Susie Summers. Thank you, Susie. Katie Nevin, Danielle T, Cecilia Blazek, and Lauren Rice. On top of that, Crystal Rodriguez increased her pledge. Thank you so much, Crystal. If you'd like to support the channel through PayPal or Patreon or by buying merch, you can do all that over at www.lordandarts.com. Thank you so much for hanging out with me here today. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday with a brand new episode of Case Cracked on the Lord and Arts channel.